Essentially, the ET carbon rankings are trying to shine a light on the state of emissions and disclosure and verification of the world's biggest companies. And really, it's through doing that that perhaps we can start asking some of the questions that are really important about this. You know, are people reporting accurately? Are people being verified? You know, all this sort of stuff. So that's the first part, and then the second aspect of the environmental tracking concept is that we're going to be launching a series of investable indexes based upon these rankings, which will re-weight companies according to their position in the carbon ranking. So the idea there is if we can get enough people to actually track these indexes, we can start to apply pressure to a company's share price, which is when it could really get quite interesting. So let's just go back and explain exactly how these rankings are working, because I think it's quite important to get your head around that before really having a look at who's top and bottom. So first of all, we are categorizing the companies into 4 different data bands. The first one, if a company has public, complete and verified data, that has always got to be more valuable than a company that has public, complete but perhaps not verified data. Then obviously some companies perhaps are reporting either incomplete emissions for the entire scope of their operations. Maybe they're just doing a headquarters or one country when they're a global multinational. So this would be in the next band. Or perhaps they're not even reporting along the greenhouse gas protocol guidelines of scope 1, 2 and 3, but expressing a figure in a way which isn't very easy to cross-compare, which we'll come back to later. And then finally, companies that make no data publicly available. So that's on a company website, sustainability report, CSR report, that any one of you in this room could go find easily and ultimately be able to understand. So that's the first step. Then what do we do about companies that don't provide a full set of data? Essentially, the method we're using is the inference method, if you like. And what we do is benchmark companies that don't provide any data against the worst performing company within that same sector. Up there we've got National Grid with an emissions intensity of around 400 tons of CO2 per $1 million. So for those companies in the same sector that aren't providing a figure, that is not an approximation, but it's an inferred figure which effectively benchmarks those companies against the worst performer in their sector. And the idea there really is that National Grid PLC will still have an incentive to disclose a high figure rather than perhaps if we were taking an average of that sector, it wouldn't actually have any reason to disclose a high figure. Thirdly, once we've done all of that, we rank them top to bottom in terms of their emissions intensity. This year we have Amlin, the insurers, at the top of the UK 100 with very low emissions intensity of around 1.2. Then Aviva, the financial giants, followed by Man Group, eSkyB, and then perhaps rather surprisingly an energy company, which especially when you compare to some of the other energy companies in that same sector, to see the massive variations in reporting. So, who's bottom? Randgold Resources have been placed bottom primarily because of their size and the fact that they make no data publicly available. These emissions intensity figures you see here are not an approximation of their emissions, but an inferred figure which benchmarks them against the worst performing company within that sector. Carnival PLC, who are known for the parent group of P&O Ferries, and so got other cruise companies around the world. Ensco, another energy company. And also there we've got Standard and Chartered, which again, given their size, perhaps they do have the resources to be disclosing and also verifying their emissions. So, what is it that we're actually looking for from companies? Essentially, we are looking for their greenhouse gas emissions to be reported along the lines of Scope 1, which is direct emissions, Scope 2, indirect electricity emissions, and Scope 3, which is the one that we were mentioning earlier, which pretty much covers everything else and is very crucial, or extremely important aspect of the scopes to be looking at, as many companies are actually declaring that around about 80% of their emissions are coming from Scope 3. So it really can't be ignored. Then, fundamental criteria of the EIO methodology is that this data is publicly available, so sustainability reports, perhaps online, and then finally that it is verified by a third party. So, what's the disclosure landscape looking like? This year we have 35% of the top 100 companies in the UK that are complete and verified. So, it's really quite a long way to go before we have full disclosure. But just taking the example of these three companies here, we've got Tesco, Sainsbury's and Morrison's, three companies that I'm sure you all know well. And we see there we have massive variation in the emissions intensity of Sainsbury's, who incidentally did not have their figures verified. Now, it is possible that they are half or 100% more efficient than the likes of Tesco's and Morrison's, but maybe there's something not quite right in the reporting there. This is the kind of question I think we really need to be asking. Royal Dutch Shell and Cairn Energy. Here we have Shell reporting a figure which is verified as well, but almost a quarter of Cairn Energy's intensity, again, two companies in the same sector. So, Scope 3 is coming out later this year, and hopefully, once that reporting standard is integrated, we will be incorporating that into our model, which could massively vary the positions of companies within the rankings. So, going forward, we will be turning these rankings into a series of investable indexes, and as I said before, the aim there is to be able to apply pressure to company share price in line with their reporting and ultimately emissions levels.